Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's extremely nice to see so many folks from the department of SMG, from CBS, and best of all to see people from outside Copenhagen Business School. Family and friends, you're especially welcome. I hope you're going to have an interesting time, and we're all very much looking forward to hearing what Bo has to say. My name is Alan Irwin. I'm the Dean of Champagne at Copenhagen Business School, but we're not actually going to give this bottle to Bo right now. We're going to wait an hour or so, and then we'll see how we feel at that moment in terms of whether it should be possible. This is a great time for celebration. I think it's an extremely happy occasion. We've got lots of young people here ready to be impressed, and it's a chance to celebrate those very cute little girls at the front are demonstrating that it's not just about an individual, it's also about the people around the individual who make their success possible. So we are here to celebrate one person, Bo, and his achievements, but let's quietly also just say that unless we had a department around Bo who could make it happen, unless we had networks of colleagues, fellow researchers from other universities, and most of all, unless you've got a network of strong family and friends, it's never possible for any individual to achieve anything whatsoever. So I particularly want to thank Nikolai and congratulate him on his achievements as head of this department, and through Nikolai to thank everyone who's played a part in building Bo to this point. Now, I heard someone asking the question just before the start, what exactly is an MSO? Well, what is an MSO? It means with special responsibilities, but that doesn't really convey it very well, Meltseli Opgaard. What it means for CBS, and we had quite a discussion about this, is basically down to three things. It means someone with strong competence in a defined field, because it does carry the title of professor at CBS, so you'd expect someone with strong academic competence. For us, it means someone who's on a strong upward track. It was very important for us to think of it as an MSO as someone who, let's say 4 years' time, will be assessing in terms of becoming a full professor. So it's very important for us that this is someone with a strong upward turn. And I think we would say, because of the kind of institution that we are, it's someone who, of course, makes a strong contribution in terms of research, but let's also say how much we value education and how much we value dissemination and service at the same time. So it needs to be someone who can fulfill all these three things. And then we come to Bo. And I must say, I'm particularly delighted to see that Bo's middle name I'm going to pronounce as Bernhard, because Bo is someone who burns hard in all kinds of different ways. Although I'll also say we want him to burn even harder in the future. Bo is someone with, if you think of in terms of his academic competences, someone with a very strong orientation to strategy making in the particular context of management theory. If you look at Bo's output, you'll see an impressive range of journals, long-range planning, JIBS, the Journal of International Business Studies. I should also mention the Journal of Management Studies. So here's someone with a very impressive academic track record. In terms of being on an upward track, well, again, if you just look at Bo's CV, you'll see a very impressive set of works in progress, Bo, the things that you're going to deliver in the next, am I coming through to you? Things that you're going to deliver in the next short-term future. So there's no joke about a politician as having a great future behind them, but Bo is someone with a great future in front of him. That's how we like to think. And if you deliver some of the things that are in your work in progress, then you'll have one very happy Dean of Research, I can tell you. And thirdly, I want to mention the broad range of Bo's service. In here, I'll just particularly focus on Bo's impressive contribution to teaching at all levels inside CBS, but also right across the University of Washington, for example, jumps out, or also Western Washington University. And Bo is someone very committed, and I think you'll see as soon as he starts to speak, to working in a variety of consulting services, very much dealing with practical questions in the business world. So we think he meets the requirements. But I have to say, Bo, this is not actually your retirement party. This is not a time to be totally satisfied with achievements. We hope you're going to burn even harder in the future. We look forward to future success. You're all very welcome, and I think we're going to have a very interesting hour or so. Thank you, and now I'll hand over to Nikolai. Thank you very much.
The fine part was super. Right, good afternoon all. I know the idea of Bo Nielsen having a hierarchical superior is a strange one to many of you, but at least formally, I am the department head of SMG, and as such, Bo Nielsen's boss. My name is Nikolai Foss, and I'm also a professor here at Copenhagen Business School. So dear Bo, dear now Professor Nielsen, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, today we are marking and celebrating, as the Dean said, the appointment of our third Professor MSO in a row. Perhaps also our most colorful of the lot. We had Dana Mindbaiva first, then Louise Morse, and now Bo. SMG, we are extremely grateful to the CBS leadership team that we have been encouraged to employ one more person at the professorial level, because it means a strong addition to our team at SMG. It's an addition of someone who can loyally contribute to carrying out the ambitious strategy that we're in the process of defining for our unit. So with Bo, we have hired someone who is in possession of an incredible energy and drive, as indicated, I guess, by his middle name, Bernhard. First time I heard that today. He's a sharp thinker. He's an excellent reviewer of other people's work, very open-minded, very direct, very forthcoming, sometimes confrontational when it comes to talking about other people's work, but it has paid off because he's been honored by several Best Reviewer awards. He's a very vocal participant in our seminars, our conferences, our workshops. In many ways, he's an extremely good colleague. He's very helpful. And importantly, he's also someone who has capabilities both in research and teaching, both in international business and in strategic management. So he covers it all, as it were. Recently, he has been extremely helpful in connection with helping to start up our new PhD cohort, and is indeed extremely active in the PhD domain. His statistics course with Sabina, who's sitting here, his wife, Sabina Nielsen, is surely among one of the most popular ones at CBS, perhaps the most popular one in terms of attendance. Not many people know this, but Bo is actually also a poet. It's not listed on his list of publications, which is online, but here's a little book. It's a book. It's a collection of poetry in Bulgarian. It's written in Cyrillic. As I'm an expert in Bulgarian and Cyrillic letters, I can of course translate. I'll do that. But you can find in this little collection poems with titles such as "Nothing Really Matters," "Amaze," and "The Cage." Here's a poem called "Opportunity." I translate, of course. "Life has granted us many opportunities, some more than others, yet often we neglect to see the beauty in simplicity. Work is not of essence." Work is not of essence. I hope these titles of these poems and this particular line is not going to be descriptive of how you see your future career here, Bo. I guess I've already indicated. I forgot to say that Bo is also a huge family man. Of course he is. Lots of you is actually family. His closest family is sitting right here. And Bo is also... a little bit. Bo is also a character. He has very, very strong opinions. And he very often expresses them very forcefully and rather loudly, it must be said. I've actually difficulties of thinking of something that Bo would not have a strong opinion about. But I also think that Bo has absorbed the ancient advice or admonition, know thyself, which is simply the best piece of management wisdom ever. As Bo recently told me, and perhaps I confided, this is a better word, I really had an attitude problem when I arrived at CBS. I really had an attitude problem when I arrived at CBS. One may make fun of this, in particular the use of the past tense in this sentence. But having known Bo for more than a decade, I think, I can confirm that Bo has really mellowed quite a lot over the years. This may be a matter of old age approaching, but I think it's a matter of self-reflection to a very large extent. And it's quite clear to me, because Bo and I have been talking about his new role, that Bo is engaging in a lot of critical self-reflection vis-a-vis his new role at SMG and indeed CBS. Because I've said it many times, and some people are annoyed when I say it, but I want to say it again. It's not that difficult to become a professor. There's certain stubbornness, hard work, but you can be a professor with medium intelligence. Just look at me. But it is difficult to be a professor. And I think in a sense that's okay. It should be difficult, because being a professor, particularly at CBS, is very much about demonstrating leadership. If you like, it's akin to being promoted from being a consultant to becoming a partner. And as such, it's about working with the other partners in a loyal manner, in a cooperative manner, to further our joint goals at SMG. We have a great team at our little department. We have a strategy that we're building that we agree on the whole. We may disagree on certain specifics, but now we have to leverage our strengths together and actually execute our strategy. But we really, really need you for this. We need your enthusiasm and your energy and your commitment. We need more specifically, we need your great insights on research design issues and methods. We don't perhaps need all of the shouting, but I guess that's part of the Bo Nielsen package. So we'll find a way to cope with the shouting as well. Lots of congratulations on your promotion, Bo, and I and the rest of the room look forward to your talk on multi-level issues as they pertain to strategic decision making.
Well, thank you, Nikolai. Thank you, Alan. Thank you all for coming on a Wednesday afternoon, taking time off your busy schedules. I'm sure most of you have more interesting and important things, perhaps not more interesting, but more important things to do than listen to this talk. Before I begin, I think it's only appropriate to say how grateful I am to become appointed full professor at Copenhagen Business School, which is truly a world renowned institution, thanks to our leadership team and thanks to all the faculty and students at CBS. It's not just an appointment from consultant to partner in any organization, but actually in a top international institution. At the same time, I would like to make a couple of acknowledgements, because it's in its due place to thank some of the people who have stood behind me all the way and sort of on whose shoulders I've sort of grown to this particular position. And first of all, I have to thank the leadership team and Alan for appointing me. This was definitely the right decision. Also, I would like to thank the colleagues of particularly SMG and at CBS at large. You're only as good as your colleagues, and as Nikolai has talked about, it's very important to have good colleagues around you whom you can engage with both intellectually and at a personal level. More specifically within SMG, I would like to thank Nikolai, who is of course my boss, and as most of you probably know, I have a little bit of a problem with bosses. But I think I've grown into that position quite well. Nikolai has been and continues to be a particular influence in my life, as Sabina, my wife, would attest to. He's a strong force behind my drive, my research, and my ambitions. And I thank Nikolai for his continuous inspiration at an intellectual level. I would also like to extend a very high gratitude to Ben Peterson. I'm assuming he's in the room somewhere. Oh, there, Ben, sorry. Ben Peterson was my advisor during the PhD years, the early days as we call them, but he's continued to be a strong mentor towards my development throughout the last decade and more, and I consider him not only a mentor but also a very close friend. So thank you very much, Ben. And last of all, I want to thank my family, my 2 daughters, Isabella and Emma, who have really suffered quite a bit, the long nights and evenings where Daddy has been in front of the computer seemingly working on something important, but to them certainly not very important. So thank you very much, Isabella and Emma, for your patience. And last but certainly most important of all, I want to thank Sabina, my wife. How can I put this in a word or in a sentence? I really can't, but Sabina is everything. She's a wife, mother of my children, co-author, colleague, and my best friend. So without Sabina, I can truly say I wouldn't have been here today. Thank you very much. However, today's topic is about multi-level issues, and before I get into this talk, I thought this quote from Abraham Lincoln was very appropriate. Given that Nikolai has talked a lot already about how I can be loud, and I am loud in many, many different ways, and sometimes I say things that I regret afterwards. Today, I will not regret a word of what I'm saying. Today, I'm going to talk about the things that I really know something about myself. However, one of the duties of a new appointed professor I learned online when I Googled inaugural speech. On the 3rd hit, I found out what it was about. The first 2 times I misspelled it. On the 3rd hit, I found out that really what an inaugural speech is about talking about where you are, where you have been, and most importantly, where are you going in the future. It's really about putting your research into context. Try to talk about what kinds of contributions have you made to the field. But more important is also an opportunity to celebrate yourself among friends and peers, and then give them sort of an idea of what will you spend the next 5 to 10 years on doing. And having top management team sitting present in the room is of course a wonderful opportunity to send some signals about what I'm going to be doing the next 5 to 10 years. And no, Alan, I'm not going to retire on the job, as you will see. So I want to talk about 3 of the major topics or research streams that I've been working on throughout the last decade or so. Ever since my early days in the late 90s, beginning of 2000, where I started my PhD, I was really fascinated with the role of strategic alliances in generating firm performance. Now, initially, like any other good PhD student, I had a grand idea. I thought, I'm going to solve the big questions in management. The big question of why do some firms perform better than others, for instance. However, I quickly realized there's way too many variables, even for Mr. Nielsen. So I sort of figured out there's a way I have to sort of isolate some of the most important factors that may be driving firm performance. And one of those factors was strategic alliances at the time. Here are some of the things that drove me towards strategic alliances. There was an early study in the late 90s, beginning of 2000, that was published in 2000, that proved that 20% of the revenues generated by the 2,000 largest firms in the US and Europe was really generated from strategic alliances. So clearly strategic alliances were important for firm performance. Also, between 1990 and 2003, we had more than 100,000 new alliances formed worldwide. And by the way, both these numbers have increased significantly over the last decade. So clearly, again, alliances must be a phenomenon that was worth studying, I thought. Then I started talking to specific managers. And one of the companies that was near and dear to me at the time, it still is Novozymes, clearly a company that's very, very successful. And yet when we talk to Novozymes and Novo Nordisk and Carlsberg and many of the other large companies, we find that strategic alliances was a really integral part of their business model. 50% of all R&D activities had to be undertaken in strategic alliances at Novozymes at the time. I'm not sure whether this still holds true, but I expect it does, because looking at the website 2012, a couple of weeks ago, we find this quote, and this clearly illustrates how Novozymes sees strategic partnering, strategic alliances, as more than just a buzzword. This is simply part of their business model. Without partnering, without finding alliances, without sharing part of the risk, cost, and responsibility, they wouldn't be where they are today, and certainly Novozymes wouldn't be going where they're going in the future. So strategic alliances were important, are important, and this is where I started my work back in the late 1990s. Now, other people have worked in this area before, so I won't claim I was the first person to work on strategic alliances, obviously. And here are some of the things that people had found. They found that there are factors we could isolate within strategic alliances that were particularly important for the performance implications. Partner selection, motivation behind, and governance and structure of the alliances was particularly relevant for performance of these alliances. So what new could I bring to the picture when I came in as a relatively green scholar in 1999? Well, one of the things I found out was that although this has been studied for decades before I came in, people had studied it in isolation. They never really looked at the interdependencies between these factors at various levels. So connecting those dots was my first part of my research, and secondarily, I tried to find out what integrating mechanisms we could locate that might explain how these different factors related to each other. Why did certain firms pick certain alliance partners? Why did they structure and govern their alliances in certain ways? And it seemed that knowledge management, knowledge processes was the underlying factors, is the underlying mechanism that sort of integrated all of these different issues. In the middle of the box, I had something called core sociological dimension, something that was heavily discussed in the literature but not very well integrated. The role of trust, for instance, became part of my research in order to try to integrate some of the various perspectives that various theories had advanced in this literature but not connected very well. So what, you might ask? Well, what came out of this? What came out of this was a stream of articles. First, very early on, I published an article on the interdependencies between these motives, partner selection, and governance. And this particular paper sort of made a slight but important contribution in terms of identifying the level of interdependencies between these variables, and more importantly, how governance structure of alliances was very dependent on the underlying motives, something that I followed through in my research ever since. The next part was going inside the green box, as you remember, the knowledge processes. And in 2005, I identified something called knowledge embeddedness. And here I combined two theories or two sort of streams of literature on structural and relational embeddedness, and sort of coined a new term, knowledge embeddedness, which has been very influential. It's okay. Later on, I got more interested into the performance measurement of strategic alliances. Talking to people in management, they said, this is fine, this is interesting, this is good. Actually, they didn't say that. They said, this is really not very interesting. Why should we care about knowledge embeddedness, some construct that you have developed? And I said, well, you should care because it tells us more about why certain alliances perform better than others. And it also tells us something about how firms derive rents from strategic alliances. And now they sort of became more interested in this particular topic. And I thought, let's ask these managers, how do you actually measure performance from an alliance? And as you can imagine, asking 10 different people from 10 different organizations, I got almost 10 different answers. Yes, financial performance matters, but there's much more to alliances than financial performance. You can enhance efficiency, you can create learning, you can create innovation, you can create long-term and short-term effects throughout the entire organization that may or may not show up on your financial statements. So if we only look at particular financial measures as the outcome of alliances, we may in fact miss the boat. Let me give you an example. If we are in the pharmaceutical industry and we have an alliance between a biotech and a pharmaceutical firm, if this particular alliance is about developing a new product which may have to be patented and so forth, when should we actually look at financial outcome for this particular alliance? It may take 10 to 15 years to get the patent through American and other types of agencies, and before this product makes it to market and actually makes some kind of financial bottom line effect, there may be a long time span. So looking only at financial performance didn't really do it. And so one of the major contributions of this paper was to link different types of alliance functions, different types of antecedent variables to different types of outcomes. And these outcomes ranges from efficiency to learning to synergies to financial outcomes. And this has been a very influential paper, not only theoretically, but also empirically. I'm very happy to say I know at least 2 organizations that have at least tried to use this particular framework in their day-to-day operations of alliances. So this goes to the practical relevance of at least some of my research. When I was at Western Washington University, which was in the period between 2003 and 2007, I also worked on the outlying institutional context of strategic alliances. And this is something that you'll hear, hopefully given time, I will come back to. Because one of the things that is really driving my research these days is the role of context. I want to contextualize everything. And if you looked at the title of this talk, it's really about contextualizing strategic decision making. Strategic decision making, strategic alliances, strategy is not just about strategy, it's about strategy in context. It's about making decisions in context. If we can learn more about these issues, we can probably get closer to more optional types of ways of making strategic management. And this particular paper looked at that and was one of the first papers to show that there is a very clear trade-off between what we can call trust and institutional infrastructure of a particular country, particularly the infrastructure surrounding intellectual capital rules and rights protections. And we showed in different international contexts how that may vary in terms of governance of alliances. Then I worked with my wife, who just had to leave, on a very important paper in Journal Management Studies, where we showed 2 important things. First of all, we showed that learning and innovation are 2 different things. Up to this point, everybody assumed that learning led to innovation. We showed that learning and innovation are not necessarily related. You can learn without innovating. You can innovate without learning. But more interestingly, we found that the roads towards learning and the roads towards innovation can be quite different. And they have quite different meanings for different organizations. And so when you look at these types of variables, you'll find very explicit managerial implications, such as how should we organize our organization or our alliances if the outcome we're seeking is more based on innovation rather than learning. Learning can be internalized in the organization, whereas innovation is typically something that leads to some kind of either product or process innovation. These 2 things are very different, and we show that in this particular paper. And then I've also worked on some papers on fit, strategic fit, and governance and performance, but I won't come too much into these, just to show that there's still stuff coming out. The second very important research stream that I've been working on is what I just mentioned before, strategy and context. And actually, let me step back a moment. What happens when you have to give an inaugural speech and you have to talk about your own research is that you have to try to fit it into boxes. So in this case, I chose 3 boxes because that's what other people do. So I thought maybe I can put my research into 3 different streams. It was very difficult. They really weren't thought of as 3 different streams when I developed this research, but I think it might make sense to present them in this way. I worked on a couple of papers here that I'll just list quickly that talks about the different types of context that organizations make strategy in. Some of these papers look specifically at the internal context of the organization. Some of them combine it with the external context, the industry context, the institutional context. And the idea behind this line of research is that strategy is made in context. The more we understand these internal, organizational, structural types of context variables and the embeddedness of firms in industry, competitive environments, and institutional environments, the more likely we are to get a true picture of how and why strategies develop in a certain way, and more importantly, which strategies are more successful than others. Now, if you're a manager in this room right now, you probably say, wait a minute, I've heard this story before. And indeed you have. If you're a manager, you probably deal with this every day. You understand that strategy is made in context. The problem is, how do we actually account for this context? How do we make context part of our strategy making? Not only in reactive ways, but also in forward-looking ways. And fortunately for you all, I have the answer for that a little bit later. The third stream of research that I've engaged in, and this is very much driven by my dear wife, who did her dissertation on the upper echelons and top management teams. And I have decided a while ago, actually in 2007 when we got married, that I might as well get interested in her research and getting her interested in my research. Otherwise, we're going to be spending too much time talking in different areas. And since we have to spend so much time together, we might as well become a team. And if you look at our CV, both of us, you'll see that we've actually become a very effective team in terms of developing research and teaching as well. in this particular stream of research, what we're really interested in is why do top management teams look the way they do? In other words, why do firms hire specific people into the top management team? And being an international scholar, I'm interested in why do firms hire foreigners into top management teams? It's a growing phenomenon, particularly in Europe, but also in the US now. Firms start increasingly to hire foreigners into the upper echelons, into the boardrooms and the top management teams of their firms. And in this particular paper, we wanted to explain why would you hire a foreigner over a national top manager. And to our great surprise, we found that strategic fit and similarity attraction. Similarity attraction means that the CEO, being a foreigner, is more likely to hire somebody similar to themselves. But since most CEOs are not foreigners, well, they're most likely to hire somebody like themselves, being, nationals of the same country. And those particular types of dynamics were much more important than what we call human capital. In other words, people are not hired because of their capacities or competencies, but they're really hired. Some people are not hired for their competencies. Of course, this is not a top management team decision, right? But some people are not hired for their competencies, but rather they're hired to fit particular strategies of a firm. So firms that are internationalizing heavily are more likely to hire foreigners into the upper echelons. And by the same token, if you have a foreign top management team or a foreign board, if you have foreign members on the board, these firms are much more likely to be open up to hire foreigners into their top management team, as opposed to firms that are very homogeneous in terms of nationalities. And this was an interesting finding, and we can also take that finding and extrapolate it to other types of diversity, if you will. And this is what we're doing indeed right now, looking at, for instance, why are there so few women in top management teams in Denmark, in Europe, in the US? And this is, of course, a hot topic given that this is being discussed at the highest level of policymakers right now. We also try to link this to strategic choice, and now it becomes interesting, I think, because it's not so interesting to say ex post why are there so few foreigners in top management teams, but more interestingly, it might be interesting to say something about under what conditions or what types of choices do these top managers make if they are foreigners, for instance. Do top managers make different choices than if they're foreigners than nationals would do? If this is not the case, then obviously there's no reason to hire a foreigner, or there's at least no cost or benefit to doing so. But what we found that top management teams that are culturally or nationally diverse are much more likely to be less risk-taking in their strategic choices versus very homogeneous single culture top management teams. So when we looked at foreign entry modes, we found that top management teams that have different nationalities, they're likely to go for collaborative modes, such as joint ventures or alliances, where we know that the risk of going into a new country is relatively high, and we want to share that risk through investments together with a local partner. Firms that have top management teams that are purely Danish or purely, in this case, Swiss, we're much more likely to choose the high-risk entry modes, such as mergers and acquisitions or fully owned subsidiaries. So this has something to do with the choices made by top management team members. We'll get back to that in a minute as well. And then finally, our forthcoming Strategic Management Journal article looks more specifically at different types of diversity in top management teams. Here we look at gender and age and nationality and functional and educational and God knows what, all kinds of different attributes of diversity. And what we show is that not only do different types of diversity lead to different types of outcomes, and that diversity is not good or bad, but it really depends on the nature of the diversity, but also on context. And this multi-level study shows that depending on the nature of the team setting that decisions are made within, depending on the firm-level strategies and the industry environment you're in, different types of diversity may lead to very different outcomes. In fact, it may be good to have nationality diversity under certain circumstances, but bad or at least have no effect in other circumstances. So the whole discussion about is diversity good or bad is really missing the boat in our opinion. And what we set forth here is a new research agenda for studying these diversity dimensions in much more detail, unpacking what levels of diversity influence firms under what conditions. Okay, that's it. Now that's it for my previous research, which is at this point I could go on vacation and maybe try to retire, but as we just heard, I can't do that. So what I'm going to talk about now is I'm going to talk about the pipeline that Alan was just alluding to a minute ago. In other words, what is coming? What is coming over the next year or two? And then after that, I'm going to make it a little bit more abstract and talk about the next 5 to 10 years of my research. I'm going to propel a new agenda for research on strategic decision making, which is multi-level, it is international, it is dynamic, it is everything you could ever perceive and ever want. And more importantly, it's also directly relevant to management, we hope. First of all, though, we have to talk about the future research that I want to conduct and I am conducting in terms of multi-level research. And I know everybody who knows me have heard me talk about multi-level research, and a lot of you say, well, what the heck is multi-level research? And I know Nikolai knows what multi-level research is, but he's also perhaps not seeing its full potential. So I'm going to advance now a new research agenda that is purely multi-level. And what I'm going to talk about is how firms, and particularly decision making, is embedded in different structures, in different holons, we can call it. A holon is something that is a whole by itself, but it's also part of a larger structure, and so it's interacting with these other environments, if you will. And so we can see how individuals are very embedded in teams, in firms, in networks, in industries, and in institutional holons, or context, if you will. And unless we can account for this context when we make analysis and discussion about strategic decision making, we may not find the true answers to the questions that we're asking. And so what matters here is multi-level research. Now, what is multi-level research before we get into this in more depth? Everybody knows football, soccer, European soccer. So suppose we rate the skill of soccer players on a scale from 1 to 10. One question here is, can I estimate the potential effectiveness of a football team by taking the average skill rating of individuals, or vice versa? And the answer is, of course, no, right? That's a given. Why not? These are questions of aggregation and disaggregation. And the problem with this is, if we unpack this a little bit, does Denmark beating Germany in the European Cup final in 1992, does that mean that all Danish players on the team should have a 10, the highest score on ratings? No, it doesn't, right? This is called the ecological fallacy. We're making inferences about individuals and individual skills and behaviors based on a team-based outcome. That's incorrect for various number of reasons, as this example shows very clearly. The opposite is the same, right? You take 11 talented football players and you put them together as a team. Should this be the most excellent team in the world? Well, Brazil didn't win the 2010 World Cup. They arguably, player by player, had the best team. So obviously, this is called the atomistic fallacy, obviously simply aggregating upwards, saying that we can estimate team level outcomes based on inferences about individual level behavior, also raises a number of concerns. Statistically, there's a lot of concerns with this. It leads us to overestimate and underestimate true values for certain variables. It leads us to commit a higher degree of what we call level 1 and level 2 errors. Basically, it leads us to potentially drawing the wrong conclusions. What we're talking about here is really nesting. We're talking about nesting structures. We're talking about nesting a decision, or nesting a firm, or nesting an individual within its holons, its higher level embedded structures. And if we understand the nestedness or the structures of our data, of the phenomenon we're looking at, we can now deconstruct that and try to figure out where exactly is it that we're going to be looking for variables of interest. This is a relatively simple and yet not so simple example. Individuals are nested within teams. So you can have 5 individuals on a team. You can have several teams within an organization. And then that's called hierarchical nesting. Relatively simple 3-level hierarchical nesting. But at the top of this, you see now we have, again, a diverging nesting. And that's because a firm can be nested within a country and within an industry. But nobody would argue that industries are nested within countries. Industries are global, or regional, or certainly span country boundaries. So it's very simple to see the problems you run into if you treat industries as being just something underlying a specific country. Now, why does all this matter, you might ask? Glad you asked. Here's an example of an empirical study we did. Forget all the numbers for now. We started the 2,000 largest firms in the world. We started them over 17 years. And we asked one of the basic questions to start out with. Why do some firms perform better than others? And so our dependent variable was return on assets. a very common performance measure. Financial performance measure, yes, but by and large, that is the kind of measure that firms are pursuing. So if we look at the 2,000 largest firms in the world, arguably 2,000 of the most successful firms in the world, and we want to understand what drives performance. What we did was we deconstructed and said, can we find out with this performance measure, where does the variance come from in this data set? In other words, what would explain this performance differential? And if you look at model 1, here we're just doing a 2-level hierarchical nesting, time within firm. In other words, we're looking at firms over time, nothing else. And we find that 60% of the variance on performance came from the time variable, so it's just time dependent, and 40% were firm-specific effects. So the firm organization, what the firm did, accounted for 40% of the performance. But then we start taking the same data set and slicing it differently in terms of nesting structures of the data. In model 2, we have 3 levels hierarchical. We now account for firm and industry. In model 3, we have firm within country. In model 4, we have firm within industry and country cross-classified, as I showed. And in model 5, arguably the correct model, we also allow for interaction between industry and countries. In other words, even though industries are global, they're not completely independent of the countries in which that you study these particular industries. And if you look at the right side, you'll find that the variance now of performance is ranging between these different levels. What does that mean? It basically means that if you want to understand why these 2,000 firms perform the way they do, you have to now account for the nesting structure of the data. In other words, and this is why I said multi-level research is more than a methodology, you have to now ask the next question, which variables theoretically would account for this variance at each level. It's not enough that I tell you that firm accounts for a particular percentage, 17% of the performance. Now I want to ask, is it the firm resources? Is it the firm top management team? Is it the firm's capabilities? Is it the firm's financial performance? What is it that accounts for this? What accounts within the firm for these particular levels of variance? That I have to explain with variables. And the same at industry level. I need to know not only that industry accounts for 15% of the variance, 17%, 18% of the variance, but I have to find out what part of the industry variables account for this. Is it the concentration of the industry? Is it the infrastructure? Is it the growth of the industry? Is it the level and number of international competitors to local competitors? Is it what kind of dynamics at the industry level drives this? And the same at the country level. So it clearly has both empirical and theoretical implications. If you want to look at the empirical implications in more detail, we started what is called the IP relationship, internationalization performance, sort of like the holy grail in international business. The idea is, if firms internationalize, go abroad, typically we would expect them to do better. They perform better when they go abroad. But is this true? Is it true for all organizations? Does it depend on the type of organization, the type of context, the type of internationalization, whatever? And the answer is, of course, yes. So in the literature, there is a big debate about this. People have studied this hundreds of times, if not thousands of times, and they found everything. They found a linear negative relationship, a linear positive relationship, U-shaped, inverted U-shape, S-curve, N-curve, M-curve, curves I can't even pronounce. So what did we do? We said simply, you're all wrong. First of all, you're not studying it longitudinally, you're not studying it on the right data set, the same data set, and you're not accounting for the correct nesting structure. So we did that on the same data set. And model 1, 2-level hierarchical nesting, we find no relationship whatsoever. Actually, Jean-François Hénard would be very happy with this because he argues theoretically there should be no systematic relationship. But we do think that firms that internationalize probably do it for a certain reason. It's likely that they are trying to at least enhance their performance. And so if we look at a more complex nesting structure, we looked at time within firm within industry, a 3-level hierarchical structure, we find a U-curve. In the beginning, the firms perform worse. Liability of foreigners, there are costs associated with going abroad. But over time, they learn how to deal with these international markets, and they start performing better. If we do a 3-level hierarchical structure where we account for country but not industry, we find a positive linear relationship. You're always performing better the more you internationalize over time. If we do a 4-level cross-nested type of structure, we again find the U-shaped relationship. And then when we do the correct, arguably correct nesting structure in model 5, we find the ever-elusive S-curve. That is, firms initially take a hit when they go abroad, Then they learn how to go international, and they become more efficient, more effective at it. And at a certain time, they over-internationalize. They go into marginal markets where the cost outweighs the benefits. And so they start losing out on these subsequent internationalization efforts over time. So multi-level research is important. It's important empirically, and it's important theoretically. And it's much more than a method. And therefore, this is what I'm going to spend the next 5 years of my life on, at least. But just to appease our dean, research dean, that I do have research in progress, as you know. In fact, I have some stuff that is not even on the CV yet. Let me talk about the 3 research streams that I mentioned before and what I'm doing currently. And by currently, I mean as of probably a couple of hours ago when I was working on one of these papers. In fact, this morning we finished one of them. One of the papers, one of the topics I'm looking at right now is strategic alliances. I'm returning to sort of the cradle of my PhD, but now I want to look at them in a more multi-level perspective. And one paper we're looking at is to try to look at the diversity of portfolios. So alliances, firms have multiple alliances. That's called an alliance portfolio. And alliance portfolios are actually nested within the firm. And then again, we need to account for industry and country level effects. And we want to understand different types of diversity in those portfolios. How does that affect performance? I'm also working on a theory piece where I simply create a, in hyphens, create an overarching theoretical model of alliances that is multi-level. Strategy and context, we have a paper under R&R in JIPS where we look at global cities and subsidiary location. Here we basically say that the literature that talks about location in terms of countries or regions are missing the boat. Firms like Novo Nordisk, Novozymes, Carlsberg, and so forth, they really don't make decisions based on countries only, or at least I hope not. In fact, it's much more localized within these countries, and an emerging phenomenon is global cities. Global cities have certain attributes that help reduce the liability of foreigners costs we saw before that might reduce your benefits of going abroad in the initial stages. And so we're looking at 6,500 entry modes by Japanese firms into all types of cities around the world. And we find some interesting findings about the connection between firm and subsidiary level characteristics in this choice. So again, it's multi-level, obviously. I'm also working on a paper with some people over in London and in China on fiscal policies and institutional environments and how they influence managers' ability to make decisions. Here we look at specific policies and also state ownership, and we're trying to figure out what those constraints might mean for managers when they make international strategies. And of course, I'm working on upper echelons as well. Here we're working on a piece with Marta Gellerknut and Sabina on the new corporate elites, we call it, for lack of a better title. Here we're studying American boardrooms. American boardrooms look very differently today than they did 10 years ago. The route to these boardrooms used to be Ivy League schools and various other functional and educational backgrounds that are very similar. But today we see a new type of people elevated to these positions, and it's much more based on social networks than anything else, something that other people in our department is also working on. So here's another opportunity to collaborate. All right, 10 minutes left. How are we doing? Are we all awake still? Now it gets really interesting, because now I'm going to talk about what I'm going to be doing the next 5 to 10 years and beyond. And of course, everything is multi-level. So I'm going to advance the multi-level research agenda that specifically deals with the question that was in the abstract of this talk. So those of you who came for the abstract, now it comes. That is, how can we improve our understanding of strategic decision-making in context? What multi-level influences might be at play? And the fundamental issue here is how and why are specific decisions made? And as you can already tell from the Homer Simpson picture here, this has to do with cognitive science. This has to do with understanding individuals, how individuals make choices. And instead of focusing so much on the outcome of these choices, which is what strategic management has traditionally done, I want to flip the coin and get inside the firms, inside the individuals rather, and start looking at how do these managers make specific decisions in specific situations. And this has to do with cognitive psychology. It has to do with understanding values and heuristics, decision rules of individuals much better. And to do this, you might say, how can we do this? Well, it just so happens that there are methodologies. I'm happy to report that can help us in this effort. And choice modeling is something that has been applied in marketing and in psychology. It's also been applied heavily in transportation and logistics research, but not so much in management yet. And basically this is based on the idea that individuals make choices based on decision rules and based on our own individual biases and heuristics. And what we want to understand is, we want to understand what exactly makes you trigger. Every decision is a trade-off. For instance, this morning I had a trade-off between should I take the bicycle, the train, or my own car. And I made a choice. But that choice was based on some heuristics, some rules inside me as an individual. It wasn't based on necessarily rational decision-making. What is cheaper, for instance? Well, that would have been the bicycle. What is safest? I'm not so sure anymore. Probably the train. What is most time-consuming? Definitely the train this morning. I'm not sure which one of these actually took precedence. So there's different decision rules that come into play in different decisions. And what we're really looking for is we're looking to understand what is it that makes people make specific choices in specific situations. And this can be applied to the three issues I talked about before. Strategic alliances, for instance, we know very little about partner selection. We know at the outcome level what partners were chosen, but we didn't know very much about what were the alternative partners, and more specifically, the people who made the decisions on the top management team or the alliance team, why did they choose this partner? What decision heuristics did they use to make this particular choice? Also, in general, how do managers make choices about, for instance, foreign direct investments, about governance choices and so forth? We know very little about those particular choices. There's a little bit of research coming out from Australia, where I'm myself part of a group that are looking at choice modeling in these areas. Timothy Devine has published one paper on this, but that's really what all there is. And of course, in top excellence, why do top management team and boards look the way they do? How do we select people into these top management teams? What really makes CEOs, for instance, or board members make a decision between two individuals? This can be very much applied to the situation of women, for instance, that on boards that is being discussed heavily in the political circles these days. But it's not enough to understand how individuals make choices. There's a lot of research on that in marketing and in psychology. We have a fairly good understanding of this, at least from a psychological perspective, although it hasn't been applied as much to strategy and management as we would like. But more interestingly, let's go to the team level. One of the things that's really, really missing in the literature, I believe, is understanding how individuals come together as teams to make decisions. Most decision-making literature in psychology is based on individuals, but most decisions in strategy and firms are made by teams, essentially. And so if teams are making decisions, we have to understand how do individuals come together and make decision rules and use their heuristics, not individually, but as a team to make these decisions. And here is, for those of you who know a little bit about our research, they have a famous bathtub, as it's called. It's called a bathtub model. And basically, what we need to understand better here is what I have encircled on the right, the upward causation or the up-level relationships. We know a lot about how firms and teams influence individuals, but we don't know a lot about how individuals influence team and firm level outcomes. And this creates some both theoretical and empirical issues, but I'm happy to say that I think we are cracking the code on how to model this, at least statistically, because this is how decisions are made in reality. We need to sort of reflect reality in that sense. Also, I'm working on a paper with Nikolai, I have been for a while, which is not going very well, on probably due to the fact that he's too busy. But it's on interlevel mechanisms in management. Again, back to the bathtub, we want to understand a little bit more about interlevel causality and causation. Causation is misunderstood in management, so we start studying biology, complex systems. Also, we have studied, or Nikolai has at least looked into philosophy, and they have a very different understanding of what can cause other things. So it's very simple for us to draw a picture like this and say, well, we think that Y can influence C upward, but in reality, when you look at biological systems, for instance, this is very rarely the case, if ever. So if we're modeling something in management and strategy and decision making, which is not true for nature, this makes us wonder whether this is really also true for management decision making. Now, this is very complex. This is psychology and biology, but I have to spend the next 5-10 years on something, and when I ask for additional funding, now you know why. Context, back to context, is not enough to understand how individuals make decisions, how teams come come together to make decisions, but we also have to understand how these decisions are context dependent. We have to understand, for instance, when we have a financial crisis, or when you change your CEO, or when there's a Sarbanes-Oxley political legal change, how do these things influence how individuals and teams heuristics and rules of decision-making influence strategic decision-making over time. So this is a longitudinal study and dynamic study. We want to try to understand how people and individuals and teams make decisions before and after specific events in the external environment. And to the extent that we can understand the events and the context influence on these decision-making, we may be able to say something more interesting about not only what would be the right decision now, but potentially also about what future decisions might be applicable in a given situation. And I brought out the word future as the clock closes in on 4 o'clock. I understand that I am the only thing between you and drinks. So I do foresee and predict not beer, but wine and champagne in your near future. So if you're not awake, now is the time to wake up. Can we say anything about future? Can managers predict the future? Can managers make better decisions in the future? I'm glad you asked. The answer is, of course, yes, they can. More interestingly, though, talking to managers, Novozymes and other large firms, this is what's on the agenda right now. We're very good at reacting to environmental changes after the fact. We're very good at making strategies based on extrapolations of what has been in the past. But we're very bad at actually foreseeing the future or shaping the future within our own domain, in our own industry. And I think this is where management needs to go if we want to see the next generation of successful firms. So this is decision-making under high levels of complexity, uncertainty, and change. It's much more than predicting the future. In fact, it's not predicting the future. It is identifying the key trends and the interactions among these important variables at the different layers of hold-ons, the different layers of context. And as we see changes happen, or we influence those changes ourselves, we can build what we call multi-level scenarios. And these scenarios are not just extrapolating from the past to the future, but they're actually allowing for multiple plausible future scenarios, and strategy makers can then make decisions based on multiple different potential futures. It sounds a little bit like quantum mechanics to you, probably. It is, in fact, a little bit like quantum mechanics. Rather than me going into specifics about how this is going to be done by Bayesian statistics and multi-level choice modeling, I will just say that this is something that's on the agenda of many firms, including Carlsberg, Lego, Novozymes, Novo Nordisk. It has been applied by some firms. BP and the oil industry has been sort of the leaders on that, but it's certainly a future research area that I'm interested in and that I'm going to advance at SMG. And I'm happy to say that I have a PhD student, Jose, who's currently working on a project along these lines, although maybe not with these words, for Novozymes in terms of developing scenario analytical techniques for firms. And with those words, oh, I have one more thing here. Let's see if we can have it. Oops. With those words, I would like to thank you all for coming this afternoon. I made it before 4 o'clock. I hope this has been as enlightening for you as it is for me. Going through this journey myself, trying to figure out what I am doing and what I will be doing was not an easy task. And for those of you who are aspiring to become full professors at SMG or at CBS, good luck. It's an interesting journey, but it's not without its perils. Fortunately, we have good management teams that take good care of us. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
After this high-octane event that well-deserved glass of wine or whatever it's
Thank you.